Buonasera a tutti, mentre le ultime persone continuano ad arrivare vi do il benvenuto a nome di tutta la redazione di Internazionale. Io sono Francesca Sibani e sono qui per presentarvi gli ospiti di questa sera, di questo incontro su Egitto, atto primo, in cui parleremo di questi ultimi mesi e del futuro di questo paese che tanto insomma, ci ha fatto parlare negli ultimi mesi. Con noi abbiamo Hossam El Alawi, che stamattina ha ricevuto il premio per la libertà di stampa Anna Politkovskaya. Vedo che ha molti fan. Poi di fianco a lui abbiamo Issandr e Amrani, il direttore del blog, giornalista di The Arabist. Sara El Sirgani, giornalista, blogger, anche lei una delle protagoniste degli ultimi eventi. E accanto a lei lo scrittore e giornalista Ahmed Naghi. E per finire il nostro moderatore di questa sera, l'editorialista del Sole 24 Ore Ugo Tramballi, a cui lascio la parola. Grazie.
Grazie. Abbiamo subito voluto dimostrarvi un assaggio della nuova atmosfera democratica egiziana, arrivando noi prima di voi. Nella presentazione c'è stata appunto molta pietà nei miei confronti. Non è stato detto che sarei un esperto di Medio Oriente, perché infatti vorrei ricordare, a proposito della primavera egiziana, un autorevole articolo di fondo che scrissi nel pieno della rivoluzione dei gelsomini tunisina, scrivendo appunto se la rivoluzione tunisina sarebbe uscita dalle sue frontiere per arrivare fino addirittura in Egitto, io ricordando naturalmente con dotta autorevolezza dell'esperto di Medio Oriente le forze armate, la grandezza delle forze armate egiziane, la forza del regime, la dimensione internazionale, la volontà degli americani, che sicuramente la rivoluzione dei gelsomini non sarebbe arrivata in Egitto e in Egitto non sarebbe successo assolutamente niente. E così sono stato giustamente colpito, perché quando è scoppiata la rivoluzione egiziana io ero a Davos, al World Economic Forum, nel posto più sbagliato dove essere quel giorno di fine gennaio. Perché la rivolta egiziana, non so se si possa definire rivoluzione, abbiamo stabilito tutti quanti che è la primavera egiziana e poi è diventata la primavera araba. Sicuramente in Egitto si gioca la partita più importante perché l'Egitto per le cose che dicevo nel mio dotto articolo, nella mia colonna autorevolissima e tostissima, perché in effetti comunque l'Egitto sì ha massa critica, sì ha delle forze armate molto importanti, sì c'è un l'elemento per esempio della fratellanza islamica, che in Egitto è il punto di partenza di tutte le fratellanze islamiche medio orientali, sì perché dal punto di vista strategico, dal punto di vista geopolitico nella regione, se la rivolta egiziana, la primavera egiziana diventa qualcosa di concreto in termini democratici, come successe per il Giappone negli anni 50 e 60 quando divenne un paese motore, economicamente motore dell'Asia, così l'Egitto diventerebbe un esempio che non ignorabile dal resto del mondo arabo, perfino in Siria, perfino in Arabia Saudita. Sarebbe il motore, finalmente comincerebbe a diventare il motore anche economico della regione e tornerebbe ad essere quello che l'Egitto è sempre stato, il cuore intellettuale e culturale del mondo arabo. Naturalmente ancora oggi non lo sappiamo e siamo qui appunto per questo, per cercare di capirne un pochettino di più. Parleremo appunto di cosa sta succedendo adesso, del ruolo delle forze armate, del ruolo degli islamici, cosa è successo dei nostri amici blogger, gli eroi di questa storia, e alcuni degli eroi sono qua sul palco con noi. Naturalmente per rendere la nostra dibattito, naturalmente se qualcuno non ha gli auricolari consigliato di prenderli, perché adesso cominceremo a parlare in inglese, io porrò anche a loro le domande, loro risponderanno in inglese, ma io porrò anche le domande in inglese per cercare di fare un colloquio un pochettino più una chiacchierata, un dialogo un pochettino più stringato, per poi dopo lasciare alla fine a voi domande che mi auguro, e ve lo ripeterò anche al momento in cui avverranno, avete la grande opportunità per fare domande, per sapere la vostra opinione, che è importantissima, stasera non ci interessa. Approfittate di questa occasione per fare domande e sapere dai diretti interessati, dagli eroi di questa storia. My first question, I don't know to whom to start because it's for everybody, but let's start with Ahmed because it's closer to me. So at least on the Italian media, we didn't know anything about anything about the Egyptian revolution, because suddenly the story was over. The story indeed is not over at all. But for the magazines, the newspapers, the radio and TV totally disappeared from the map. Despite now it's a very important, very sensitive, a very interesting moment of your history. So what is going on? I've been heard that on the 26th of November we will have the first leg of the elections. Cairo and Alex. Second leg of the elections on the other day, which is, sorry, I wrote it down, on the 14th of December, and the third leg, Upper Delta, etc., on January 3rd. Hamid, is it correct as a electoral agenda, or is some change is going on as well?
It's not clear until now, and actually I am exception because for the last 3 months I'm living in Germany, not in Egypt. But also I'm seeing what's going on. I'm chatting with my friends, so I'm a little bit updated, and I discovered that being outside, especially in this period, is giving me another viewpoint, because most of the time the battle is still on and the game is still happening, and what's going that you still have the head of authority now in Egypt. It's the military, the High Military Council. So the battle is between them and many political groups and activists, and the game is going like that. Like one day they make a goal, the other day we make a goal. But for you, if you are an activist who are living in Egypt, you don't see when you achieve a goal. So most of time living in Egypt, I remember before I leave, and when even I'm talking with my friends, from time to time they have a strong wave of depression, and you keep hearing from them this everything is going to be like back, it worse than before, and we are going to lose the revolution and so on. But for me, being outside, I'm saying I'm starting to be more optimistic than before I was in Egypt, and I could see many achievements. I don't know about the election and the parliament and democracy. Maybe the guys here know better than me. And I don't know about this issue because really I don't care about parliament or election or this stuff. And the battle is on something different in Egypt. And actually for me, and I think for most of Egyptian, like election and parliament mean nothing. Because before, like 2 months before the revolution, we had an election, we had an elected parliament, and we had a parliament, and we had everything, and then one day, nothing in it. So really, I think the battle is in another area.
I think interesting. First of all, we discovered that even in Germany, they don't cover anymore Egypt. So what is the atmosphere? I mean, anyway, any kind of electoral agenda or political agenda for democracy is sustainable today in Egypt, Sarah?
Stable.
Sustainable at the moment.
It's very difficult to predict anything at the moment of sustainability or future political structure. A lot of the political parties that are supposedly going to contest the elections haven't formed any sort of concrete political agenda or platforms. the elections are basically based on let's go there, win a seat, and then formulate a political agenda that, or a platform that fits somehow in a bigger context of the ideology they are representing. I guess it's elections are important to some extent. There are different tracks. You cannot try to figure out the future in just one direction or one path or one way. Elections is one of the ways. It's not the only one. And that's one of the battles that, regardless of how the electoral law, the laws that are being put in place to regulate the elections are put, regardless of who exactly, who are the political parties vying for that, it is still a battle to fight, at least so that there is a track that's going in one direction that people have an idea about where it's going.
Yeah, but Issandr, any revolution, any spring, let's call it revolution at the moment, needs to find out sooner or later a point, a rational point, at least to make a step forward. So at the moment seems to be no elections, or yes, maybe elections, not constitution, or yes, maybe a constitution, not a president, maybe we will see what kind of president. So how to reach a point of this? I mean, it seems that you are still, sorry if I say so, but it seems that you are still in Al-Tahrir Square. You didn't get out from Tahrir.
Absolutely. The situation at the moment in Egypt is a complete mess, because this transition, the transition after February 11th, when Hosni Mubarak was forced out by the military, basically, and by the people in Tahrir, has been completely mishandled. And we're reaching a point where today in Egypt, I think there's a mounting new political crisis and a crisis of confidence in the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, SCAF, as it's called for short. Right now it's over the elections and the electoral law and electoral districting, and this has been the topic of debate among the Egyptian political elite for the last 2 weeks. But there's also a bigger one. It's about how come there's no reform of the security services of the police that has even started, apart from a few people being dismissed at the very top since February. How come we're seeing the rehabilitation of certain figures that were associated with the fallen regime? How come the military is dealing with the political elite in a way that's beginning to resemble more and more with the way Mubarak and his entourage dealt with the political elite previously? How come we have a situation where the military seems to be trying to play different political groups against each other, secularists against Islamists, and so on? If this is a caretaker government that was meant to restore as quickly as possible, as was understood in February, a normal civilian-led political system, why is it playing all these games? Why is it that since February, again and again, people have had to go out onto the street to fight and get what they wanted? And it's becoming quite tiresome. I mean, it's becoming potentially leading to a new crisis, because there is very little, I think, capital left for the military now in Egypt, whereas it started with a lot of capital in February. And the other thing is that there's contradictory tendencies, I think, within the Egyptian population. A lot of people, in this country where, remember, 50% of the economy is informal, a lot of people live day to day, just want to return to stability and because it's about their livelihood. Other people, want to make sure that the revolution wasn't in vain, that 150 people or more didn't die in vain, and that they gain significant gains, which are not necessarily about the elections and which party will win, but about their livelihood, about their dignity. We really, I think, at the moment of where a decision has to be made about, we still don't know, for instance, when the presidential election will take place, which then the presidential election is perhaps more important than the parliamentary one, because that's when the power is transferred from the military back to civilians. If you look at other countries, Tunisia, the initial 3 months in Tunisia were very rough, and it went back and forth. But eventually, Tunisia the political forces, the caretaker government, got together and agreed on a transition. Quite worryingly, 7 months later, we're still not at that point in Egypt, and it's and there's two camps. There's the people now who say, let's call them broadly radicals, who say, well, we will not settle for anything less than everything that we wanted back in February. And there's the people who just want this uncertainty to be over, because obviously it's bad for the Egyptian economy, it's bad for public morale. There's still a continuing insecurity situation. I think hopefully we'll see this resolved soon, but there's not, unfortunately, the quality of the management has not been very good.
So no elections in November at the end?
I think there will be elections in November, but the debate today is what kind of elections? The electoral law has been imposed. The SCAF originally tried to negotiate with political parties, but eventually they're still trying to impose an election law. I won't bore you with the details because it's extremely complicated, but basically most parties wanted, almost all of the parties wanted a list-based system, and they're offering a mixed system that's very, very confusing in a country that's 40% illiterate and which will have a lot of new voters. Why? And they never explain really the rationale behind their thinking.
Yeah. My question not always represents my thinking, but in this case they do. Hassan, if I well understand, you decided you and the people that are following you, and a lot of other people, not only the people that are following you, you decided to boycott the elections.
Yes.
Let me say, as we said before, as Italian, remembering my own country history, to boycott is not always a good choice, because in 1929
You were alive then?
And then we got 20 years of Berlusconi. 20.
You look really great.
Ma in realtà siamo andati solo a San Siro ai tempi di Berlusconi, non siamo andati sull'Aventino. 20 years of fascism of Mussolini. I think that you have to play the game as it is, no matter how tough is this game. Don't you think it could be pretty dangerous?
Maybe I just wanted to comment on something quickly that my colleague Ahmed here said, because I agree strongly with his opinion, and from there I'll answer your question about the boycott. It is true that many people from the activist community and very sincere friends of ours, they went through phases of severe depression over the past few months. Many people, after Mubarak stepped down on the 11th of February, they had high hopes that this revolution is proceeding in the right direction and that they will reap the fruits pretty quickly. Maybe in my case, Ahmed got optimistic when he traveled abroad and maybe he saw the picture from outside. But in my case, and in the case of many of my colleagues who are part of the Egyptian left, we did not really get into maybe the same level of depression. And actually, we kept our optimism a little bit high. This doesn't have to do with the fact that, our personal nature or anything. But it just depends on how you estimate your goals and how you estimate your means. For many in the activist community and among the Egyptian protesters, their only channel of activism and of trying to bring about the change to this country had been Tahrir Square. So the barometer, whether the revolution is proceeding or is it regressing, had to do with how many people we can mobilize in the square. Can we still get those 1 million man, protests? Can we still get, the same level of public support for the protests, even if you're not, protesting or not? And I can understand if you calculated with this barometer, you are bound to get into depression. Because since Mubarak stepped down on the 11th of February, we never really managed to pull together, the same numbers of people to show up in the square to support whatever we were protesting about. However, the reason that I did not feel as depressed, for example, as Ahmed or any of our sincere colleagues in this revolution had to do with the fact that our strategy became different after the 11th of February. We raised a slogan, which is, we need to take Tahrir to the factories. We need to take Tahrir to the university campuses. We need to take Tahrir to the companies and to the workplaces. We managed to get rid of Mubarak, but we have 1,000 mini Mubaraks who are in every institution that we have in Egypt. And for us, the real barometer, whether we are progressing or regressing, is how many institutions we managed to purge, how many gains did we manage to achieve on the ground in terms of the escalation of the social movement. Now, as Sarah was referring, there were, and Issandr too, there were divisions over this whole issue of labor strikes. I mean, some people were saying that the labor strikes that broke out in the final days of the uprising and continue with us till today, that it's a threat. No, we need a stability, we need like a stable period of time, we need to give the transitional government a chance. But in my case and the case of many others, we actually saw those labor strikes as the real continuation of the revolution. We held out in Tahrir during those 18 days of the uprising. And I am very proud of our role in Tahrir. But let's face it, what brought down Mubarak in the end were the mass strikes, not just our protests in Tahrir. Yes, I mean, we defeated the police. We defeated the thugs that they sent. We've managed to stop the army from encroaching on Tahrir. We took over all of these areas, you know, I mean, in front of the TV building, we expanded the sit-in to the parliament, but still, you know.
Yeah, but I'm sorry if I interrupt you, but the kind of revolution you want, I mean, not having around thousands of small Mubarak, and the same bureaucracy, the same military power. You need to have a real revolution, not a peaceful revolution like the Egyptian
that's a
one.
stereotype. You know, that's a mistake. I mean, the Western press, in addition to a part of the activist community, they try to propagate this image that Egypt was like, you know, I mean, a peaceful revolution, and it was all about like flowers and, you know, I mean, non-violence, etc. Well, guess what? On the 28th of January, the Friday of Anger, how did we defeat the police? We burned down 190 police stations. How did we defeat state security police? We stormed their buildings, you know, and we took control of it. In the case of Suez, you know, people stormed police stations, and I have videos on my blog of them fighting back with Kalashnikovs. Now, these images really, I mean, did not make it to the Western press, and of course the army was not really big on disseminating this image, you know, I mean, about that, oh, I mean, there was violence involved, but there was violence involved. And when you say a revolution, we only started the first phase, which was the 18-day uprising. Now, this continues, you know, I mean, with us till today. Not on the same beautiful visuals that you see, you know, I mean, of men and women in Tahrir, you know, I mean, holding banners, etc., but it continues in every single industrial sector in Egypt. It continues in the university campuses. Ahmed said something, you know, which... Exactly. Ahmed said something earlier which, you know, I know that you were not enthusiastic about, related to the boycott of elections. Now, for me, elections, it's... I mean, you can't have like an absolute line of I'm always boycotting elections or I'm always taking part in elections. It doesn't work this way, you know. And actually in previous elections, you know, we as an Egyptian left, we did make interventions on some cases. However, let's face it. I mean, we are entering elections. And number one, Mubarak's army generals are still running the show. Number two, that I mean, even it's very metaphoric. The State Security Police General, whose name is Mohammed Rifat Umsan, he was the guy in charge of supervising and rigging the vote in the 2005 parliamentary elections, the 2006 upper house elections, and the infamous November 2010 parliamentary elections, which the National Democratic Party, Mubarak's ruling party, won by 97.5%. You know, I mean, in the elections. He's the same guy who will be supervising these coming elections. So I will not give legitimacy to this circus that the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces is holding for us. Now, am I trying to claim that, or I'm trying to argue that people should just, like, stay at home and, like, not do anything about it? No. I mean, people are already involved in the strike wave, where the past 3 weeks, almost 500,000 Egyptians took part in strikes. Now, you don't read about this in the Italian press, that much, but this is for me, the real continuation.
Maybe in German press.
Okay, yeah. So, but that's for me, the real essence of this revolution. Once we manage to topple the army generals, and yes, it's not going to be by flowers. There will be, I expect, huge mess in the coming months. But this is a revolution that will take from 2 to 3 or 4 or even 5 years to get settled. Not because I'm someone who loves instability, but it has to do with the fact of history. That's what always happens in revolutions. Yeah. So when we topple them, that's when you can sit down and write a constitution. That's when you can sit down and hold, national elections.
Sure. Let me indulge on a kind of conspiracy theory game. The issue was Gamal Mubarak. Hosni Mubarak wanted him as a new Rais. The army didn't want. The police, the army, all, let's say, the wonderful world of Mukhabarat in Egypt knew that you were ready to go to Tahrir. And they allowed you to go to Tahrir rather than in the other time in the past where they were very much more violent. Even this time they were violent, but even worse. They allowed you to go to Tahrir because they wanted to defeat Mubarak. The Mubarak designed to bring his son as at the top of the country. And the army was used. I mean, it's not my thinking, but it's just a conspiracy theory game. And the army was, you were used by the army because they wanted to defeat Hosni Mubarak. And the name of the game at the end of the day was economy, the control of the economy of the country. What do you think about this Giulietto Chiesa conspiracy theory? You don't know who Giulietto Chiesa is?
No, I don't agree.
Please, Ahmed.
Yeah, like I read many things like that, especially in right-wing media and Wall Street Journal and so on. But it's unlogical. It's unlogical for anyone who's living in Egypt because first, the army or Mukhabarat didn't allow us to go. We broke the rules. If you are talking, for example, in the day of 28, you are talking about 800 people dying. And the number of police officers and other guys also was high. And even when, to be clear also, even when the army entered the street, the first group of army entered the street was the Republican Guard, the Republic Guard, which is like it's complicated inside the military system in Egypt, but what's supposed to be related to the president direct. And during this day, I was in Tahrir Square because since the day I was in Boulay. So I saw it with my eyes, a tank and 3 military vehicles and cars, people was burning it. And what happened after a while that during the 80 days of revolution that the army didn't make a decision like, okay, we are with Hosni, and we can't play against him, but in the same time, things was going bad. And they thought, like, I know I have friends who making their military duty now in the army. And one of them told me that the night before Mubarak resigned, they woke them up at 10 and collected all the guys. And they did this in all the military bases, on all the army bases. And they asked them, the soldier, because in the end, the Egyptian army, most of it depend on soldiers, like they are normal people and they have families and brothers and sisters in Tahrir. So they bought them, they woke them up and asked them, if you with Mubarak, go right. If you are against Mubarak, go left. And in this guy, in my friend base, they found the percent was 70%. So even if the army is thinking or thought in any time to be with Mubarak until the end and to make it kind of civil war like case of Syria or Libya, it will not succeed. The army will get divided from the middle. So it's not like this. The army people are playing game, and all this complicated issue. And you know another thing, they are not smart guys. And this is one of the problems that we are facing now. Yeah. Because, for example, when you are dealing with the High Council, the Supreme Military Council, you don't know what they want. Like they want to be an authority. Why? They don't even have, like in the case of Abdel Nasser, for example, you could see that Abdel Nasser have kind of ideology, kind of things he believe in, mixing the Arabic nationalism with the military, with the new, yeah. But those people, they don't have anything in their mind. So why they want to be an authority? Like they are in the authority now, but they don't know what to do with it. So like all this conspiracy, like story you told is not, there is nothing logic in it.
If I may also intervene on this, I think you have to keep in mind the situation just before the revolution. The Mubarak had been in power for 30 years. He had been quite ill for the last year. He probably worked fewer hours than 2 hours a day. The regime was increasingly fragmented between the presidency, Gamal and his friends in the ruling party, the army, the people around Omar Suleiman and the intelligence services, and the Ministry of Interior led by the Habib al-Adli. What happened on January 28th was that the police was defeated by the people. The police was essentially exhausted, could no longer maintain its could no longer maintain control in the way it had done in the case of previous demonstrations, because the demonstrations were simply too big, and was asked by around 5 p.m. on January 28th to pull out. The scenario that came together next was that Omar Suleiman, Mubarak's right hand, was basically stepped into the vice presidency, and then everyone thought he would be the next president, he would take control of the situation. And that immediately meant that Gamal was out. Gamal and his people were out on January 28th, maybe even on January 25th. It was clear that Gamal would not make it. Omar Suleiman, came out, and this is a man that never appeared on television before, never spoke to the Egyptian people, basically came out, spoke to the Egyptian people, and it turned out he sounded like Darth Vader. And, he was even more sinister. I mean, Mubarak, you can say many terrible things, but when Mubarak had a way to speak that I think ordinary Egyptians understood. Omar Suleiman is a sinister spy master. I mean, and there was obviously not much agreement also within the army, I think, about Omar Suleiman. Remember that one of his key jobs before had been to spy on the military, on the senior military officers. And that's probably why we believe, and this is an important thing, we still don't know the story of this revolution. We know the activist story pretty well. It's been told a lot. A lot of the activists have told their stories. We don't know the government side, much of what happened. We're just starting to get a little bit of information here and there from the Mubarak trial and other sources. But on February 6th, there was an assassination attempt against Omar Suleiman that was probably carried out, I've been told, by figures within the military. On February 10th, the eve of that Mubarak stepped down, there was a confrontation between the Republican Guard and ordinary army units at the presidency. So this was, it went too much in all directions to be some kind of Machiavellian plot. And I think the continuation of the way everything has been done, the decision-making has been ad hoc, and depending on the circumstances, the fact that it involves external players also from Egypt. I think the Gulf countries are very concerned about what's going to happen in Egypt. The United States obviously is concerned. Israel is concerned. European Union is concerned. It makes this a very a situation that's going to be in flux for a while, with a lot of different inputs and directions.
Yeah. Let me stay in Tahrir Square at the end of January. Sarah, you are an expert on media, as Ahmed is. So you start, I mean, the world of the web, this fantastic, democratic, free place to give and to bring around information. You were the first to occupy Tahrir, to start the revolution. But again, my questions are, because I must be the kind of the devil's lawyer for some extent. But the real revolution started when TV went on the square, when Al Jazeera went on the square, because at the end of the day, the country, Egypt is not, the computer, the laptop are not all around the country. So the critical mass in the square was brought by Al Jazeera, the more traditional way of media as the TV. Do you agree on that?
Surveys have shown that people got their information about what was happening through TV. But whether this had a role in getting more people in the square or not is yet to be studied. It can be associated with it, but not necessarily a causality relation. The fact is, for example, on Jan 28, people on the streets remained on the streets. They did not have access to any sort of communication. They didn't know what was going on beyond their immediate vicinity, like 300 meters around them. And they kept on going. They didn't have mobile phones. They were caught. There was no internet access in the country except for very limited ISP. So communication played a part on the longer term, but not necessarily on the first few days. And this is when it got the momentum. Yes, TV played a role. We were discussing earlier with Hussein how things like that happened before, but people like me, people like the general public did not have access to that pictures, to the video of the brutality, and they were not, so they were not aggravated by it. They did not find something to object to or to hate so much that they have to go out on the streets and protest. That changed eventually with technology, but at the end of the day, that's one tool that reflects what's already happening on the street. You can have as many videos as you want on TV and online, but unless people really want to go out, people feel the need, feel the injustice, the oppression, media's role is at the end of the day not somehow relatively limited to what we give it credit to.
Maybe can I actually, I want to say that something related to that. Al Jazeera and the other main stream media outlets have been in the protests from day one. It's not that, they arrived late. This number one. Number two, we used those mainstream media outlets. That's what actually many people do not understand, which is like, okay, we had a telecommunication shutdown. Our mobile phones, they were all shut down. No SMS.
Shut down your mobile phones as well.
No SMS, no internet. We just had few landlines, that were working. So how do you think we mobilized for those 1 million man marches and protests? Basically, we used to sit in Tahrir as organizers. If we agree that, tomorrow there will be a 1 million man protest, we would just pick up the phone and call up, no, sorry, not the phone, but we would just go to the offices of Al Jazeera and the BBC and tell them, by the way, tomorrow we're arranging this. So, they would go on air, Egyptian activists have announced that tomorrow they are holding a 1 million man protest Tahrir. So actually, all our friends, at their homes and the other provinces and everywhere where we cannot reach them, they would, watch Al Jazeera and then they would, come to Tahrir. So more or less they were part of the revolution, although they did not necessarily wanted to be part of. And just one final point. you and many others always put like social media versus mainstream media, as if they are like enemies or competitors. No, but
not me.
Not you. Okay,
I swear.
You're forgiven then. But in reality, there is an unofficial marriage between the two. Basically, I mean, like my blog, for example, which you were kind enough to describe it as influential and others, etc., etc. I mean, how many people do you think, you know, I mean, read my blog? I mean, before the revolution, it could be as low as 200 readers a day, and on a good day, it will be 1,500 only. That's it. I mean, after the revolution, it could range from 2,500 a day hits to 11,000. But it's about who checks it out. It's mainly activists and mainstream media journalists. So you are, let's say, you know, you work at Al Jazeera, you know, you read that some information Hussam, you know, had put it. It goes into Al Jazeera and it reaches more than 100 million people. So, and we've always played with that over the past few years. But many people tend to ignore it and put us as like, you know, competitors or like, you know, I mean, as enemies, or one is going to take over the other. But there is some unofficial marriage between the two.
Sure, of course, I agree with you. Ahmed, do you want to follow up? I mean, if another Tahrir Square would happen because the army would be, I don't know, would change their mind, would try to, again, to do something to stop the democratic spring, how the media will react? In other words, what is the level of democracy in the media, in Egyptian media today?
I think the media will, like, this is also one of the problems in the media market in Egypt, because you have the national media and you have the what's supposed to be an independent or private media. And you will always hear this about, they are argue which one of them are independent. And like after the revolution, the national media a little bit changed, like this changed all the editor chiefs who were pro Mubarak and so on. But in the end, all the medias in Egypt, all the media's company and the media's organization, its structure is, it has no structure. Like if we are a bunch of guys and we want to make a journalist or a media company, we just have to reach for money and then we will make it. Like for example, in Egypt, you read the newspaper and you cannot understand if this newspaper is right-wing or left-wing, Islamistic. Like, for example, there is this newspaper very popular in Egypt called Al-Masri Al-Yawm. And you open Al-Masri Al-Yawm one day and you found that they are attacking the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay. The other day, the picture of the leader Muslim Brotherhood is on the cover. And they are defending him. And actually, the journalists who are doing their journalist job in Egypt, after a while, they stop to think. Like, the acting of the journalist in Egypt is reaction. Like, there is something is burning here. So let's take the camera, pick, and make the story. And in the Egypt media market, for example, one of the most strange things is like, you have a lot of investment and the money is entering the industry, and many newspapers started to rise, but in the same time you will not find a magazine in the Egypt media market. There is no magazine. There is no media that's making kind of analyze or thinking a little bit, because in the end journalism is part of it is art. Part of it is depending on creativity. And this kind of creativity, this kind of art is no longer exist in the Egyptian media market. It's all on focusing on the hot topics. To be part, in the end, even if they are private or national, they are making this to serve another, like some newspapers are related to political parties, some newspapers are related to the government or to the army. So they are focusing on hot issues in a way that will serve this political or this movement. So in the end, the only way to find kind of creativity in what is happening, to see a new view of the stories of what is happening is through the internet. And not only as a blogger, but you have bloggers and you have several networks. People started to depend more and more in this kind of social network to get the information and to build the connection. Not even the people, even the army itself.
Can I add to that? Actually, if there is another wave of, the media could use another wave of a revolution or uprising, because I believe mainstream media failed to gain enough grounds throughout the past few months. We had a very active censorship office that would have no problem calling people up, telling them that they didn't like this story, they didn't like this line, this word, this quote. They could threaten by revoking, that they could revoke your license, they could confiscate the paper itself on certain days. And that stopped. They stopped calling after February 11. Actually, starting from January 25, they stopped calling. But they're still active, they're still monitoring. And just over the past couple of weeks, the calls started again. They started making a presence in print houses. And it's all because we failed to push and create new lines. Not lines that we can cross, lines that they can't cross in terms of freedom of expression. And it's because in specific period in February and March, a lot of mainstream journalists or mainstream media refused to get their minds out of the self-censorship that was part of living or working as a journalist in Egypt before that. And a lot of stories that were on the ground were not reported as quickly as they should be in Arabic press specifically. And it took them a while to have a collective decision that we're going to cover that, we're going to cover that. It's mainly are violations by the military. And it's this hesitation that, in my opinion, has created that failure, has led to that failure. Because people took the freedom in a sense of, yes, now we can attack the Mubarak and his aides and ministers. Well, they are out of power now, so yes, you can attack them in figures, but unless you can actually attack someone, not attack, but criticize someone in power while they are in power, then you're not free. And we fail to capitalize on that or create something like that. So we would need something,
Sure.
another wave.
Political Islam, and so we could discuss 2 hours, but only about this. Today, the New York Times wrote about wrote a very interesting file about the Islamic constellation in Egypt, but even in the rest of the countries involved with the Arab Spring. And the point of this story, of this article, was that it's what the most important, the most interesting confrontation is not between, in Egypt, for instance, secularists versus Islamists, but inside the large sphere of the Islamic movement, between moderate Islamists. Just to give an example of the people who are thinking about a political Islam like Turkey today, and fundamentalists or conservative Islamists. You think it's still the real ground battle for the future of Egypt is
No, I don't believe so. I know that the Western press in general is obsessed with Islamists and people with beards. I know that for the secular liberals in Egypt, for them the fight is about whether we should have a secular state or a theocratic, state. No, I'm generalizing now, but among some of those secular liberals and some of the secular leftists. In my view, it's not really about that. I mean, you can get a secular liberal government that at the end of the day will adopt the same neoliberal policies, of the previous regimes, and we can end up in the same situation as we were. I don't care if my oppressor is with a beard or without a beard. For me, I would like to adopt a different approach, which is I will actually split those Islamists along social lines. I know Ahmed might not be supportive of that view in general, or maybe you disagree. I see you nodding your head, but okay, you agree, that's good. I would like to split them according to social lines, meaning the Muslim Brotherhood, for example. I mean, when you talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, I think it's a mistake to talk about the Muslim Brotherhood. What Muslim Brotherhoods? I mean, there are many factions inside the group. There are people inside the Muslim Brotherhood I speak to, and I find them very close to the left. And there are people I speak to inside the Muslim Brotherhood who are like, you should go and join Al-Qaeda. The same goes also, for the leftists. When you speak to a leftist, sometimes you just deal with the person and all what he's obsessed about is just secularism. But he doesn't talk anything about class politics or anything else. So only 1 week ago, 3 weeks ago, we got the biggest strikes in the sugar refineries in Upper Egypt, in Qena, in Armant, in Luxor. These are all south of Egypt, very conservative area. And this is the area where the Jama'ah Islamiyya, and to a lesser extent the Islamic Jihad, had been active for years before they were crushed by the new millennium, more or less. The leaders of these strikes, basically, are Salafis. They are Salafis, and some of them have been former members of the Jama'ah Islamiyya, and they have been detained before by state security police. Now, the position of all the Islamist groups now towards strikes is that they are against the strikes. And some of them have even issued fatwas against the strikes, saying that strikes are haram. You shouldn't, strike at all. But at the same time, you're seeing people from that same movement who are just now starting to act in a completely different manner from their leaders, who are all now like established, satellite sheikhs as we know them. They have their own like satellite, TV, networks, and they sit down with the military generals, they discuss, and they have their own wheelings and dealings with the regime. Now, if an Islamist comes to me and he says that I want to apply Islamic Sharia now, usually I say, that sounds like a fantastic idea. What are you going to do about the national minimum wage? What are you going to do about the right to unionize? What are you going to do about like the land question? Are you going to distribute them or not? That's when you start splitting those Islamists along, social lines. And that's what I care about.
Yeah, but I wonder what is the attitude. Yeah, that's even a question for you. I mean, I wonder about what is the attitude of the unions in Egypt and of the large sector of the working class regarding how influenced is the message of the political Islam.
Zero.
Shut up.
No, I want to add a short comment. I'm against right wing and I'm against fascist, and one of the problem for me to the Islamic groups that they are not Islamic. What they are talking is not related to Islam. It's related to fascist mind, that they have an image of identity, and they want to put this identity in the world. And I can see the same thing is happening in France and Germany. I'm sure it's happening somehow in Italy. 2 weeks ago, there was an election in Berlin. And in Berlin, they had this party called NPD, which is supposed to be like kind of new Nazi party. And their signs, their slogans in the street. The first sign was saying, if Ali made a crime, send him back. The other sign was picture for mosque, was the X on it. I was shocked, but the people who was walking in the street normal, like nothing. And I imagine if something like that happened in Egypt, if there is an Islamic right-wing fascist party will make a campaign and wrote something like, if Michael made a crime, send him out. Or he bought a picture for church and make a false on it. How the media, how the Western media and the global media is showing the right wings in all the country is not equal. And for me, for example, I'm against Salafis, but in the end, when I listen or I hear a Salafist guy speaking, what he's saying, there is nothing different. What he's saying is exactly like what Marie Le Pen is saying, for example, in France. Of course, Marie Le Pen is wearing a minijab and he is wearing a galabaya. And the two, Marie Le Pen want all the women walking with minijab and he want all the men walking with the galabaya. It's different, yeah, but in the end, it's the same mentality and the same dangerous. But how the global media and the Western media is showing it, it's like, no, it's nice. This is different. These are Islamists, but in the end, yeah, but the main things, the main core of the two is the same.
If I could just intervene on two quick... Two quick points about Islamists and the Muslim Brotherhood in particular. Is that one thing I think you have to keep in mind is that intellectually, I would argue, the Muslim Brotherhood for the last 30 years suffered tremendously from the Mubarak regime, not just in terms because they were being arrested, especially in the last few years by the hundreds, but also in terms of their own development. Basically, by not having room to operate politically and being constantly on the defensive, they stagnated too over this period. And what we're seeing now, and the reason that there are now at least 5 Muslim Brotherhood offshoots, the official one and a number of others, as well as the Salafists and as well as other more, let's say, centrist Islamist movements, is that finally they have the room to have the debate within themselves. And I think Hossam is right, is that they are, Islamists may all agree that the Quran is great and they may all have conservative values, but that doesn't mean that they have the same values over social issues. It doesn't mean they have the same values over political rights, over the identity of the country, for instance, the right of non-Muslims and so on. There are some that I would completely agree with and that have a very modern, I think, point of view, and others who have quite a completely reactionary and view. The second thing, and really, if we can go back to the question of the elections, and even if people think they won't matter, let's say that they go ahead. One interesting thing, again, pointing back to what Hossam said about how Islamists should be confronted on these social issues, is that if the elections go ahead in 2 months, and as most of the mainstream debate has been in Egypt, is about how secular or how religious the constitution will be, because these elections are partly about the next constitution, since this parliament will elect the Constituent Assembly that will write the new constitution. If the debate is centered around these things, identity issues, then the Islamists have a huge advantage. Because on identity, they win every time. Because the reality is Egypt is a conservative country. Most people have an intrinsic, I think, reaction to the religious debate and the question of their Muslim identity. But if the debate is moved over on social issues, then secular forces and I think the more reasonable and Islamists will have a much better chance. So I think tactically it's very important on where, in the next few months, where the debate will be.
Sarah, what is your point of view as an Egyptian woman?
There's always the scare of what they're going to do to the women. I'm not scared, and I've been asked this repeatedly over this past few hours. Let's break it down. If we believe in our worst fears, that they're villains and the Islamists are going to take over the country and they turn it into an ultra conservative country, this is impossible within 4 years. If they win power and they agree on everything and agree on all political issues and take over the parliament, it's impossible for that to happen, given the social and political structure. Yes, we are very conscious of our religion identity, but if you observe day-to-day lives of people in Egypt, it's not as conservative as you would think it is. If you tell someone, do you want it an Islamic state? A lot of people will tell you yes. If you break it down to, but you might not do this, if you might not do that, they would tell you, oh, okay, this is not how I understood it to be. So there is a lot of social factors that are overlooked when you talk about the Islamist state taking over. But even that, it's not the Islamist, political Islam is not only about making a conservative social structure or a conservative social country. There are a lot of issues involved, and as Hassam explained, there are a lot of politics in it. And there's also the business side. A lot of people I talk to, like, that work in banking or finance, they think that the Islamists are going to have a great deal with the liberals when it comes to the economy and free economy, just to oust the leftists and the workers out of the structure. So it's not just one-track-minded. The women are going to wear the veil, they're not going to go out, and all the men will be in beards. It's not like that.
Thank you. What struck me most last time I've been to Cairo at the beginning of this summer was that how strong was the Muslim Brotherhood in terms on a political point of view, able to agree a lot with General Tantawi about everything, trying to have a kind of transformation as a European Christian Democrats. And at the same time, the division among the young and secularist front, I mean, the movement, 6 April movement was split. The huge discussion among the secularists and liberal, not able to find out a synthesis, a real point to continue the struggle. It is a wrong point of view, or in a way, if it was right.
Understand the last sentence?
I mean, the difficulties for the let's call it leftist and secularist camp, the incapability to find out how could I say, a united point to continue the struggle in front of a Muslim Brotherhood who's becoming more and more a kind of government party.
The Muslim Brotherhood, since the collapse or like the stepping down of Mubarak on the 11th of February, have taken away, from the streets. They have withdrawn. They do not take part in the current strikes. Usually the mobilizations we hold in Tahrir, the Muslim Brotherhood is absent. And not only are they absent, but if you look at and read their online mouthpiece, Ikhwan Online, it has the most foul slurs and most horrible accusations against the revolutionaries in Tahrir. And they use a language that's strikingly very similar to what the security services and Mubarak used to talk about us, in Tahrir. But at the same time, and yes, you're right. There is so much wheeling and dealing happening, behind closed doors. There is a rapprochement between them and the army generals. But having said that, all of this comes at a cost. Number one, this is not new. Even under the Mubarak's dictatorship, and despite the massive crackdowns upon them that Issandr referred to, the leadership still always, offered compromises to Mubarak to the extent that I think 3 months before the revolution, like their supreme guide, Muhammad Badi'a, went on TV describing Mubarak as a loving father, and he begged him to release the detainees, and he was...
And a year earlier supported the idea of Gamal being president.
Yeah, as Issandr said, he even, said that they wouldn't mind Gamal Mubarak, to succeed his dad, and still the crackdowns also continued, despite that. Now, the first 3 days of the uprising, if we recall well, the Muslim Brotherhood leadership did not endorse the protests. Yet, their young cadres took part in the protests. And it's not like a conspiracy, as some secularists think like, oh, you know, I mean, the leadership is pretending that they are not supporting, but, you know, they are pushing their young cadres. No, no, these are divisions. These are divisions that are basically happening. So again, yes, they are acting as a government party, but it's only the leadership. And this is costing them much. Number one, I am increasingly every single protest I attend, I find many young Ikhwanis, many young Muslim Brotherhood who have just showed up, although their leadership has been insulting the protesters. Number two, when it came, for example, to the student union elections, which happened last spring, just, you know, 1 month after we toppled Mubarak, the Muslim Brotherhood were not part of the protests that were happening on the campuses to purge the campuses from the security services and from the faculty members who were members of the NDP, and, you know, they had close affiliation with the security services. They didn't take part in that. Well, guess what? That cost them in elections. In Alexandria University, for example, where everybody thought there will be some landslide victory for the Muslim Brotherhood, I think they won only like 12% of the seats, and we were all like, you know, we couldn't believe that. In other places, it was mainly either independent activists or, you know, new faces that won the elections, or people from the left or from the liberals who were part of the ongoing protests. Now, forget about the coming elections. That's not for me like the barometer for their strength on the ground. But the more and more the leadership keeps making compromises with SCAF, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, that will cost them even organizationally. So that's why I'm not really that worried that much about, like, you know, I mean, their power and rapprochement with SCAF. Regarding the left, it is true what you said. You know, there are divisions within the left. And there are divisions within the liberals. But these divisions, I am optimistic that over the past few months we've come a long way in forming some united fronts that will not reflect necessarily on elections, but it reflects, and I can see it, on industrial actions on the ground.
Ahmed, what do you think about the last sentence I said? I mean, are you so optimistic regarding the capability of the democratic camp to unite on a common ground, a political, business-like common ground?
Like I agree with what Sam saying, and also I want to point something. Democracy is not about the parliament election, and building a new Egypt is not about parliament election. Like what's happening all over Egypt in university and the labor union, for me it's more important. I'm living in Cairo since I was 16, but my family is living in a village. It was village, but now it's something between village and an ugly city near Mansoura. And this place, you have 60,000 people living there, and usually there is no local government, there is no Omda, and there is nothing. There is just a bunch of guys who are related to the NDP party, and they are taking the money, and like they don't make anything. But after the revolution, suddenly they appeared from nowhere, like 5 youth guys. They are from my generation or older than me, and they started to make like kind of small local NGOs. And they say that, and after they make this kind of NGOs, they organize an election without justice, without anything. They organize an election in the village, and they choose like a council, and they went to, because this village is related to a big government, the Agahleya, and they went there and said, those people are who are responsible for us. And they started to manage the village in new ways. They started to make like kind of a small local project, started from cleaning the street to making like kind of sale market for the families, for the schools, and so on. And so what is happening in Egypt, outside of Cairo especially, is that the circle of the political scene in Egypt is getting wide and wide and wide. And I'm sure in the coming days we will start to know and hear about new figures and new groups that's starting from roots, and most of them will be outside of Cairo, not from Cairo, because politically Cairo, it's not political, it's about show. Like now in Egypt, you have to do something. If you are a political guy or kind of political activist, you must have a television show. If you don't have a television show, you are not a politician. So that's the meaning of political and also game in Cairo. But outside Cairo, there is a new rules for democracy. It's rising up, and not only democracy, but a new rule and way of managing the society, your local society, which is more important. And this is really, this is the most important defense line if we are talking about New Egypt. Not constitution that said, yeah, democracy is good and secular is good. All of this is just text, just papers. But this line that's growing from under, this is the first and the most effective defense line.
Thank you.
Can I maybe cite another quick example? Very
15
quick.
seconds.
Okay.
14.
In Manshayat al-Bakri Hospital, for example, in Cairo, the doctors, nurses, and the workers, they staged several strikes after the Mubarak toppling, and then they formed an independent union that does not follow the state-controlled unions. They impeached the director of the hospital. They forced the army to impeach the director of the hospital, and they elected a director for the hospital among them, who's a doctor. And this was repeated in 4 other hospitals, in an example that's similar to what Ahmed was referring. And this is being replicated in other factories. For me, this is the real democracy from below that we should be focusing on before we talk about the national elections.
Sure. Thank you. I have another question. I would have several other questions, but I want to give floor to the people, to the questions for you from the people. Which is the last question is the international dimension of the Egyptian revolution, because Egypt is strategically the most important our country, and of course it made a peace agreement with Israel. It was a basic pillar of the American policy in Middle East, if the United States has a real policy in Middle East. But so what is the strategic dimension, international dimension of the revolution, Issandr?
We still don't have a full picture because the transition in Egypt is not over. We don't have a clear idea of the direction of the next quote-unquote regime. I think that won't come until there's a new president at least. But obviously this is an earthquake, and it's an earthquake in an American order in the Middle East. The relationship, Egypt and the Camp David agreement between Egypt and Israel, or really between Egypt, Israel, and the United States, was a strategic underpinning of the region since the late 70s. And the idea of Egypt that always, whether it says so officially or not, collaborates with the United States in its imperial management of the region, if you want, has been a key American asset for the last 20 years. Now, you might say that it's produced some good results for the United States to some extent, but really in the long term it's heading towards a disaster, because that relationship began to be more and more one-sided. It was part of what drove the repression and what made the extent of the repression in Egypt possible, partly because the United States and the European Union, among others, systematically turned a blind eye to human rights abuses, especially when they were directed against Islamists. And it's really created a huge reservoir of resentment, I think, in public opinion against the U.S., against Israel. I think it was also a very dangerous this completely one-sided relationship was very dangerous, because it gave room to Israel to carry out some of the wars it carried out in the last decade, to continue in Lebanon in 2006, in Gaza in 2009. It gave a green light for continued settlement expansion. If we go back to the original Camp David agreement, we have to remember that it had two parts to it. It had an Egyptian-Israeli part, and it had a wider Israeli-Arab and Israeli-Palestinian part. The Israeli-Palestinian part was completely abandoned, actually, I think, to what we know now, so that's great regret. This one-sided Camp David that basically, where Egypt just does what it's told in exchange for aid or in exchange for diplomatic support, collapsed. We don't know what's coming next. What's coming next is probably a much more multilateral order, because there's other players in the vacuum that's been created. Other players are coming in. Saudi Arabia is asserting itself as a force for counter-revolution, really, to a tremendous degree. Much more active diplomacy. We're seeing even small states like Kuwait and Qatar use not only their diplomatic clout, but for instance, there's been, in the last few months, there's been a big debate in Egypt about foreign funding of NGOs and political movements and so on. And a lot of it originally centered on the $40 million that the US aid is giving for democracy promotion in Egypt. Well, it just turned out, I think it was published last week, that in a single transaction, the Al Thani Foundation in Qatar, belonging to the ruling family of Qatar, gave $30 million. So that's 75% in a single transaction of the entire US democracy promotion budget that went to Ansar al-Sunnah, a really extremely conservative group, charitable association in Egypt. So the problem right now is that Egypt is weak. Egypt has been weak for quite a while. And Egypt will take a few years to, I think, to reassert, what some see as its natural role in the region, considering it has about a quarter of the population of the Arab world. And I think the danger is that it's going to be a playground for others. And I'm most concerned, really, because I think the United States is globally speaking, considering the economic crisis, considering the fact that it's bogged down in Afghanistan and Iraq. I'm actually personally more concerned about the Saudi counter-revolution than anything else.
Yeah, in two words, how the bilateral relation with Israel will change for Egypt?
Well, the big thing is that public opinion matters now. I don't get the impression, for a long time, there was no Israel could do what it wants and count on Mubarak to hold down the fort, basically, to make sure that Egypt did nothing, or even sometimes at the end of 2009 Gaza war, basically kind of tacitly encourage it. Now Egypt will still have its interest. Is going to perhaps perceive Hamas as a danger, simply because the fact that there's a conflict in Israel-Palestine is going to be something that's... Sorry?
Maybe soon you will have Hamas office in Cairo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
as you were saying, that Hamas may open an office in Cairo if it's kicked out of Syria. The entire region is changing. It's hard to know. I don't get the impression that as is portrayed sometimes, that there's much appetite in Egypt for going to war against Israel or for any serious escalation of the conflict. But I think there is huge public demand for Egypt to assert itself towards Israel diplomatically, in terms of supporting the Palestinian people, in terms of regaining national dignity. I think that's what the raid on the embassy, which I don't approve of. I don't approve of raids of embassy generally, but I think that's what was about. I think that's why we will continue to see.
You had the right to argue just for 15 seconds as well.
No, I don't want to argue, but I want to follow something as Issandr said. There is an earthquake. The Middle East is changing in Egypt, Tunis, Syria, and so on. And the only country that nothing is going to change and nothing is changing in it is Israel. Okay. And this is happening because for some reason, Israeli people are dealing with themselves as they are a first world country. No, we are not from Middle East. And in the same time, it's like a third world country controlled by the army and generals.
Thank you. No, actually, it's not true that the Israelis didn't change, because they started to move the trucks and the excavator from Sheikh Jarrah in the eastern side of Jerusalem to Gilo, which is on the western side of Jerusalem. So they move, time to time, they move the cranes, etc. Ok, abbiamo finito la nostra chiacchierata, scusate se abbiamo annoiati, speriamo di no. Qualcuno vuole fare delle domande? Prego. Una sola, insisto. Qua vige un clima pre-rivoluzionario, cioè noi siamo i Rais, loro danno le opinioni, voi fate le domande, per favore non fate comizi, approfittate della magnifica occasione che l'organizzazione vi ha dato, dandovi delle persone in grado di rispondere. Grazie, prego, la prima, c'è la qui.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Tiziana Prezzo. I'm a reporter at Sky News Italia. I want to ask you, I work as a correspondent in Turkey. During the days of the revolution, Turkey has been indicated by at least the Western media as a kind of a model for the Middle East. Since I spent a long time there, and I appreciated the differences even in the mentality, in the history, in the culture of Turkey. Do you really think that the kind of democracy that there's in Turkey can be applied to Egypt in the same way?
No.
You started, you finished.
The Turkish model has been put forward by the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and has been also argued for sometimes by the Nasrists, the Arab nationalists in Egypt. But for me, we didn't do all of this in order to end up with a political system where the army, to a great extent, enjoys immunity. I know this is changing a little bit in Turkey, but still, that the army would be the ruling institution, and it's a red line and that you cannot touch, while the civilian government, you have the elections, go and enjoy it, at the end of the day. But if you cross the line, then you either get a phone call, to leave the office, or you get a coup. I am not, although it's changing, but even that, what's happening today, for me, it's not a model at all.
Sara, just 1 second. È possibile accendere un attimo la luce qua, perché non riesco a vedere chi alza la mano se ci sono altre domande. Sara, please.
Please. Right. It's when people talk about Turkey and Egypt, about Turkey in general, they see the model of the marriage of Islam and democracy, because as if it's something that could never happen and it's new and unique in Turkey. But as Hussein said, it's not just about that. Even that is not perfect, or any close to being perfect for me. But the Turkish model for me is really about the army controlling everything, and a lot of people just don't consider that when they're assessing, when they're talking about the Turkish model. But once you explain that the dimensions of the secular versus the religious in Turkey has a military factor in it, it becomes a more complex and, for me, an undesirable model.
Just so I want to keep 2 more questions together, and then you can... Ci sono... giovane, ecco che
does exist a real revolutionary struggle outside main cities like Alexandria or El Cairo, or is left all in the Irans? And if yes, how is it organized in the whole country?
Vedo una signora lì.
In the countryside?
1 second,
yeah.
1 second, one more question. Tenga alzata la mano così la possono vedere.
Allora, innanzitutto mi preme complimentarvi con voi per il vostro coraggio, per quello che avete fatto e per quello che state continuando a fare, e vi ringrazio per la vostra preziosissima testimonianza. Passo alla domanda. Durante i giorni della rivoluzione, che cosa vi aspettavate dalle democrazie occidentali, cioè dalle persone, dai leader occidentali che di solito nei loro discorsi istituzionali parlano di libertà e democrazia. E che cosa pensate di quello che poi alla fine delle democrazie occidentali hanno fatto, di fatto?
Just last, ho promesso al signore, ce l'ha il microfono? Prego.
This is just a question to everybody. If you think the
Well, c'è un microfono, sorry if I interrupt you, I don't see you. C'è un microfono che gira da solo. Dov'è? Dov'è? Chi è che sta parlando? Who is speaking now? Oh, please, go ahead. Poi dopo chiunque abbia il microfono in mano taccia, perché deve parlare come il signore con quella camicia azzurra.
If you think new institutions need to come up for democracy, do you think the revolution might get too violent to handle given the Egyptian context?
Thank you. Last question.
Yeah, my name is Francesco. I have two very short questions. The first one is, what do you expect from the other side of the Mediterranean? So this side of the Mediterranean, not only from governments, but also from the civil society. So which kind of relation do you expect with the civil society, which is also living a very big crisis, although it's an economic crisis on this side? And the second question is, what do you expect from the international community? So regional organizations such as the Arab League, but also international organizations such as the United Nations and the other organizations that play a role in your region. Thank you.
Thank you. Ci fermiamo qua, abbiamo raccolto un po' di domande, poi facciamo un secondo giro di domande. Choose the questions you want and answer. Please, Issandr.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to make a quick point about the Turkish model issue. And I think the question is which Turkish model? Because there's the Turkish model of an Islamist party coming in power and everything going more or less smoothly. There's the Turkish model of the army in Turkey in the 1980s and the army in Turkey now. There's the Turkish model that the Nasrists might admire, which is the Kemalist cult of personality. And different people in Egypt, I think, look at different Turkeys. In terms of what the West did and what it might do now, I have to say, I should say I used to work for a think tank called International Crisis Group, and part of my work was dealing with Western diplomats and briefing people in ministries of foreign affairs, so I had a lot of experience. And the shocking thing, I think, in the last few years, partly as a reaction at the Bush administration, I think particularly in Europe, there was a complete rejection of supporting democracy in the region. And I think it's a really shameful thing. That I would go to meetings in Brussels and talk to EU officials, and they say, no, this issue is off the table. We don't even want to talk about this. It was kind of that frank. If you see the latest major policy from the northern Mediterranean to the southern Mediterranean, it was the Union for the Mediterranean, which was specifically designed to not talk about human rights and democracy. That was its entire purpose. And I certainly hope that there will be demand on this side of the Mediterranean to change this, because you're signing treaties with these countries that have an Article 2 that's about human rights and that's never enforced, for instance. In terms of what the West might do, I've argued, and there's a lot of opinions on this issue, as little as possible. I don't think that the West has done great for the last 2 decades in in Egypt, and really the question has to be that people in this part of the world, whether we like it or not, whether they're Islamists or communists or whatever comes out in the next governments, you have to give them room to find out who they are, rather than impose an outcome. And yes, this is going to be very difficult, because this is a region where a quarter of the world's oil reserves are. So there's realistic obstacles. But the policy I would adopt is what Google's motto: don't be evil. At least do nothing bad.
Thank you. Ahmed.
for the question about the organized. For the countryside, what will you do? Like, you don't have cameras and you don't have a police officer. Why are you going to make a demonstration? So during the days of revolution, most of the people from countryside were they prefer to come to Tahrir Square. So even when you are walking in Tahrir Square, you are walking in kind of little Egypt. Like, you found, for example, a tent, and there is a sign on this tent said, "Sons of Samarlut," which supposed to be in south of Egypt, is here, and they was the revolution and so on. And after the revolution, what's important, as I was telling, is how to rise the democracy from under, and this is what is happening. About, I agree totally with what Issandr said about foreign policy and European policy. Is like, at least don't be evil. Like, okay, don't talk about the human rights with them, but on the other hand, don't sell them tear and bomb gases, or electric sticks. Like, why you even make such all these things and selling it to them? And you know that they are dictatorship and there is a torturing on it. Like, I don't want you to be I know the life is hard and complicated, and it's international political, but don't be evil. That's it.
Sarah.
I guess the evil part could be the double standards in terms of you're promoting yourself as a self-righteous democratic state that advocates human rights, but then the actual deal sidesteps all of that. And I was talking to diplomats in 2010, they would tell you on the record, it's soft power, we do not want to push more. Off the record, they tell you we want Mubarak.
Italian, you mean?
European.
No, we don't like to disturb persons, so sorry.
It's European, and that reflected a lot of the general Western or the general outside world attitude towards Egypt. But that hurts a little bit, because you associate yourself with certain values like democracy, and then you go against it. I'm sorry for using you, but and that eventually hurts the fight for such values. What happened in Tahrir was different. That people, there was no intervention. It wasn't from the outside world. It was people taking matters into their own hands. And it's good that it happened that way, because no one can claim they did anything in that except the people there. But the expectations at this time is that any statement of support is good. People didn't want statements in support of Mubarak. They wanted statements in support of democracy, which what they were fighting for. And that was the least they could do. They didn't want any intervention. They didn't want any hard power, soft power. They just a statement of support. Maybe that was the highest of expectations. They didn't, because at the end of the day, you cannot live in isolation. You're a part of the world, and politics and international foreign relations is part of the game, whether you like it or not.
Thank you. Do you want to say something? Qualche altra? Ne vedo due addirittura una vicino all'altra.
Yes, good evening.
Alzate le mani per niente, avete già il microfono, sapete già che parlerete. Sono come gli appalti di alcune imprese italiane che andavano
No Italian, I'm Egyptian.
Oh, great. Sorry about that.
So my question is, I'm a filmmaker and I'm Egyptian, and my question is mainly for Ahmed. Ahmed, you mentioned that the Europeans are not reacting to the extreme movements, however they are put on logos or posters and so on. And although I believe that the Islamist movement and the Islamics in Egypt are only a boogeyman, they're not really like a power that we should be afraid of. However, I want to ask you about what you think of the posters that were all over Egypt of Islam is the solution, Islam هو الحل, and how people would react to me dressing up and walking down the street like this, for instance, or to just like women doing whatever they want.
Altre domande? Chi ha già il microfono in mano? Avanti, prego.
I have two questions connected to the same person, Nabil El Arabi. I don't know if it's pronounced correct. So what do you think, do you see his role as positive as leading the Arab League? And what do you think of him assuming the authority on the Palestinian issue?
Thank you. One more, please.
My question is, how much do you think the international forces you described and the security service and other Egyptian forces in power can influence or even ruin the process of democracy from below that you just described?
One more. They don't have.
La domanda è questa: come giudicate l'atteggiamento? Sì. Come giudicate l'atteggiamento dei media internazionali nei confronti delle manifestazioni alla ambasciata israeliana, molto diverse di stigmatizzazione rispetto all'atteggiamento iniziale nei confronti delle manifestazioni in piazza Tahrir?
Thank you. Ahmed, you are the first to the direct question.
I didn't get your question clear, but if I understand that your question is what I'm thinking about the Islamic movement and their policy to the freedom of speech and women issue and bikini and all that son, or
طب أقول لك بالعربي.
Okay.
It's my question was that we also have a lot of extreme posters and pictures, and the media does not do anything about it. Also, people get very aggressive towards women, like being openly liberal or dressing up the way they like or being as free as this.
Yes.
There are a lot of signs and posters that are against, that are extreme, and there's nothing being done about them.
And there is more in Egypt. There is more than fascist, more than sign and symbols. There is fascist acts sometimes, and I agree totally with you. What I was saying is that we have a right wing, we have a kind of fascist, what they call themselves Islamist, but in this other hand, you had the same problem in the other Western country, and the media is showing the two not an equal. Like, of course, you will have a problem if you are walking in some areas or neighborhood in Cairo, in Egypt, with this dress. But in France also, if you are walking niqab, you are not allowed to walk with niqab. And this is what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is if we are, I'm not looking to myself as an Egyptian or a Muslims or whatever, but if we are people who believe in kind of human right and equality, and so I think, in my opinion, this kind of fascist ideas is bad and worse, whatever if it's coming from Islamic background or national background or military background, or even Western background. This was my point of view. But regarding to what you said, we have many things like that in Egypt and more than that. But in the other hand, what do you have is to battle and fight against it.
Thank you.
The direct answer question was for you. The other one,
about the Egyptian security services. Is that the question? Okay. I think there were a couple of questions. One about Nabil Al-Arabi and the Arab League, and about the Egyptian security services, and about the international media and how they cover the protests and the Israeli embassy. 3 questions. Regarding the Arab League, I support the complete dissolution of the Arab League. This is not the Arab League of, it's not like the Arab People's League, it's the League of Dictators. That's where 22 Arab dictators, they sit down and they conspire against their own people or conspire against one another. So it's a waste of resources, complete waste of resources. And I think it should be completely dissolved, and this money should go to development projects.
Actually, the Arab world is not spending a gazillion of money for the Arab League, I have to say.
Regarding the Egyptian security services, that's a huge problem we have in Egypt. Mubarak ran this country using the Interior Ministry and the fearful State Security Police, or Amn al-Dawla in Arabic. It did happen that we stormed the state security headquarters in my neighborhood in Nasr City, which is the national headquarters. And that's where Abu Omar, who was kidnapped from Milan here in 2004, flown back to Egypt, and he was tortured in that facility in my neighborhood, together with many other rendered suspects, in addition to very close friends of mine who were also, they passed by this detention and torture factory, as I describe it. We did storm it. We did storm other offices around the Republic. However, the government has dissolved it after we basically smashed their headquarters, but they have reinvented it, as now they call it Qata' al-Amn al-Watani, which in English they call it Homeland Security, just like the American one. And even if you look at their logo, it's the same one as also the American Homeland Security, except like I think the American eagle or something is like holding wheat, but we're holding lotus paper. I mean, there is very... Okay. All right. So, and in this newly founded Homeland Security apparatus, at least 25% of the old state security police, that's according to government statements, they are still there. They are part of that bureau. Where did the rest of the 75% go? Actually, very few of them, because of our mass protests in July, they were like referred to retirement, not trial. Secondly, the rest, they are being recycled in other police departments. Like, and that's what the government went on the record to say. So, which is a big deal. I mean, like on the one hand, like you used to get tortured in a state security facility, and the following day you would go to the ordinary police station and you would find the same guy who was torturing you yesterday. Now, he's like, a police officer. So, of course, this is a huge, huge problem that we're facing. But again, the revolution is unfinished, and that's one of the things we continue to campaign and fight against. Regarding the international media and how they cover the protests regarding the Israeli embassy versus those in Tahrir. Of course, I mean, it was different. Tahrir was a very nice visual for all Western journalists, where they can go in and, find people singing Kumbaya, and like everything, men and women, Muslims and Christians, and in a square, and, it's a beautiful visual, banners, etc., etc. But of course, when it comes to the darling, of the Western countries, which is Israel, this number one. Number two, the whole issue of paranoia around embassies, it took a completely different turn. These events were described as the events of, and the work of thugs, the work of criminals, and the work of even former members, of the regime. But hey, I cannot blame them. This is the same discourse that has also been used by the military and by the state-run and state-controlled media in Egypt. So, which is actually not necessarily the case of what happened on the ground. Maybe I'll stop.
Thank you. Issandr, you want to follow up?
My
Some of
mic
the questions
has run out of battery. Just
leave it on the floor. It doesn't matter. You don't need it anymore.
Just very quickly on Nabil Arabi. Nabil Arabi was very popular in Egypt when he was appointed foreign minister. It remains a mystery to me why he accepted a job at the Arab League. Arab League is where politicians go to die in the Arab world. It's where they go. And I met Nabil Arabi. I think he's a decent man, but he's been placed in a position where he will do indecent things now. This is what the Arab League is for. And it's also saddening to see that there's been a reversal of Egyptian foreign policy since his departure. For instance, Nabil Arabi was in favor of reopening the Gaza border to goods, including construction material, which Gazans sorely need. And that, since his departure, nothing has happened on that front. With regards to the Egyptian countryside, it's been raised before, and I think it is important what's happening in the countryside. We tend to be too Cairo-focused. I think it's worth remembering that during the 18 days of revolution last January and February, large parts of the countrysides did not revolt. That good parts of Upper Egypt, for instance, there were very limited protests. And the reality in the countryside is quite different from the reality in the bigger cities. But I think Ahmed gave a quite good example of what's happening, of the grassroots work that's happening in the countryside, and that's a long-term process. I think the other. What the Egyptian security services, I think Hassam covered very well, and on the question of international media coverage. I mean, generally speaking, it's normal in a sense that Egypt was the center of the universe back in February, and that now it barely gets a mention, because a political transition is not an exciting news event. It's a long-term process, and it's hard for television cameras to cover. So if there's not much attention to the Arab world anymore, that's normal, and frankly, it's also a product of the fact that there's fewer and fewer international correspondents who actually live in the countries. The budgets of most newspapers and magazines has dwindled in the last decade, partly because of the internet and dropping revenues. On the upside, you don't need to rely necessarily on correspondence anymore when you have people on the ground who whether it's through English language media or whether it's through even Google Translate to help you understand what's happening in Arabic and what people are writing in Arabic. So there's big changes in the media world that they offer both downsides and I think and upsides. And regarding the coverage of the Israeli embassy protest, I mean, personally, I think the mistake of that protest, the protest started because the wall was built around the embassy, and people were trying to destroy that wall. And I think that was completely the right thing to do. I think that it's normal for once the embassy is raided, because there are international standards about embassies, that they became a lot more negative. And I think the protest movement has to be a lot more tactical, because I think it builds up. International support is important in the way forward. I think it is the public image that the protest movement and the movement for change in Egypt has is important. And I think it's something that they need to keep in mind, especially when there's more important things than raiding an embassy, like all the strikes, all the electoral law, the whole political process taking place.
Thank you. Sarah, do you want to answer? Do you finish? It's okay? You don't want anything? The revolution just started. You just finished to say something? Oh, I see. Okay, so if you, of course, you will have a lot of more questions, but I'm sure that anybody of us has plenty of Twitter and Facebook, so you can send to anyone of us your more questions. Of course, the Arab Spring, the Egyptian Spring, is still going on, and it will stand for a long, long time. And nobody knows yet if it will have an happy ending. So stay tuned and be part of the struggle. Thank you very much. Good night.